The Alabama sun beat down hard on the Montgomery family farm. Dust curled under Abel's boots as he crossed the front porch, wiping sweat from his brow with the edge of his shirt sleeve. The boards creaked like they always had. Same sound his father heard. Same sound his grandfather hammered into place nearly a century ago. The house stood tall, if weathered. Built in 1892 by free hands after freedom was won, lost, and clawed back again. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. It was legacy. And now, it was under siege. The letter came in a white envelope with no return address, stamped boldly in red, "Notice of Violation." Abel opened it at the kitchen table, surrounded by faded family photos and the silence of memory. His wife, Darlene, had passed 5 years earlier. His daughter lived out in Atlanta. It was just him now, and the land. "I don't even use pesticides," he muttered. "My irrigation's a goddamn rain barrel." He knew what this was. It wasn't about runoff. It was about the land. The next day, a black SUV showed up. No license plate in front, tinted windows all around. Out stepped Clint Maddox, a man who smelled like cologne and contempt. "Mr. Montgomery," Clint said, "the state appreciates your cooperation. There's a development opportunity in the works, senior living, eco-friendly, all that. If you leave quietly, we can make this easy." Abel narrowed his eyes. "I got papers proving my title clear back to 1867. Clint chuckled. "Paper can be lost, especially when no one's left to speak for it." And with that, he left a glossy brochure on the porch step and walked off whistling. That night, Abel dug through the crawl space. He didn't sleep. Instead, he pulled open floorboards under the pantry where his grandfather once hid food during the war years. And there, behind the third brick, just where Papa said it'd be, was the leather-wrapped map, faded, hand-drawn, edges singed from a fire no one talked about. It was signed by Major Augustus Harlan, U.S. Army, 1867, the Reconstruction officer who had granted the land after the war to Abel's great-great-grandfather. It wasn't just a deed, it was a weapon. The next morning, Abel drove into town. He passed a row of black farmers already losing their land. Signs on their fences, condemned, seized, future development site. The local courthouse had no time for them. The state claimed they didn't have proper documentation. He parked outside the tiny office of Sandra Dubois, a 28-year-old lawyer fresh out of law school and drowning in pro bono cases. She looked up from her desk, blinking through thick glasses. "Mr. Montgomery?" He unrolled the map on her desk. She stared. This is military-certified land transfer documentation? Where did you get this?" Abel looked her in the eye. "From my grandfather's wall. And now I need you to make 'em remember it." Outside, the wind stirred the dust like a warning. But for the first time in weeks, Abel felt his spine straighten, the way his father used to when churchmen talked of justice. He wasn't moving. Not without a fight, not without a reckoning. And if the state wanted a war over dirt, he'd bring them a battlefield they'd never forget. The walls of Sandra's law office were lined with dusty textbooks and sticky notes, but now they were also plastered with copies of every document Abel had: maps, tax receipts, photos of the house from the 1930s, and that precious signature from Major Augustus Harlan. She stared at her computer screen, then back to Abel. "This should have been on file with the county recorder," she said, "but I just ran the archives, and your family's name has been scrubbed. Not missing, not misplaced, deleted." Abel didn't blink. "I told you," he said. "They've done this before." Meanwhile, back on his land, a drone buzzed over his barn. Abel walked out with a slingshot and took it down in one shot like he did birds when he was 12. He knew who sent it. Not the state, not really. This wasn't about conservation. This was a land grab. 2 days later, Sandra called him in with urgency. "There's a name that keeps showing up," she said, eyes wide. "Maddox Land and Energy. They're tied to the governor's brother-in-law. And the ordinances used to condemn your land, drafted 6 months ago, right after this area was rezoned for private green infrastructure." She tapped her pen against the printout. "They plan to build a water bottling plant here, Abel." He sat back, breath slow and heavy. "Using the same wells my great-grandfather dug? Water we've been living on for generations?" Sandra nodded. "They're not just taking your land, they're stealing your past and calling it sustainability." Later that week, Abel walked the perimeter of his field with a camcorder. He narrated every ditch, every well, every sign of his family's hand in the soil. The hand-dug irrigation channel from 1911, the wooden boundary post carved with initials L.M., Lemuel Montgomery. His voice was calm but firm. "They think they can erase history with paperwork, but this land remembers, and now so will everyone else." That night, a knock hit the door. 3 times, fast. He opened it to find a woman in her 60s, gray hair tied back, wearing a deputy uniform. She took off her hat. "Name's Deputy Carla Brinks. My grandfather served with yours. I can't go against orders, but I wanted to warn you, something's coming, big." Abel nodded. "I figured." Carla leaned closer. "They're filing for eminent domain, but it's dirty. The judge they're using, he owns stock in Maddox Energy." The next morning, Sandra filed a motion for injunction using the 1867 military deed as historical precedent. It was the legal equivalent of throwing a match into dry grass. Media picked it up. Headlines rolled in. "Farmer claims 19th century military deed overrules state seizure. Black landowner accuses governor's allies of land theft. Civil War-era map sparks modern legal battle." And suddenly, Abel wasn't just a farmer. He was a symbol, a story, a fight the system couldn't keep buried. On the 3rd morning after the injunction, a line of news vans parked along the gravel road outside Abel's farm. The hum of generators, the hiss of cameras adjusting focus, it all felt surreal. Abel stood on his porch, boots planted, arms crossed. He wasn't wearing a suit, just his old plaid shirt, a hat his father left behind, and a steady look that said, "I'm not moving." Inside the courthouse, things were unraveling for the state. Sandra had submitted the 1867 deed, an affidavit from a retired military historian confirming its validity, and evidence that Judge Carter Wills, who signed the eminent domain order, had received over $250,000 in campaign donations from shell companies connected to Maddox Land and Energy. And the press devoured it. "This is no longer just about land," Sandra told the reporters. "This is about corruption in daylight." That afternoon, a group of veteran black farmers drove in from neighboring counties. They set up folding chairs in Abel's yard, brought coolers, told stories. One man, 72, said, "They tried this with my daddy's land in '83, said the soil was toxic, built a golf course on it the next year." Another added, "You ain't alone, Abel. You just the first one who got the damn proof." They called themselves the Dirt Line, a name that spread on social media like wildfire. Hashtag the Dirt Line. Hashtag this land remembers. Hashtag stand with Abel. 2 nights later, a fire broke out in Abel's barn. No witnesses, no suspects, no justice. He stood watching it burn, lips pressed tight, his hands clenched, but didn't shake. Deputy Carla Brinks arrived late, headlights flashing against the charred frame. She walked to him quietly. "They're trying to scare you off," she said. He nodded. "They should have tried harder 20 years ago." Back in court, the opposition lawyer made one last attempt. "The deed is outdated. The state's needs outweigh private claims. We're talking infrastructure, jobs, progress." But Sandra stood, firm as stone. This deed was signed by a Union officer during Reconstruction. It predates the formation of this very court. And more importantly, it was never challenged, never voided, never bought. She paused, turning to the judge. "And the progress you speak of involves stealing water, displacing history, and handing it to a corporation hiding behind environmental buzzwords." She held up a photo of Abel's boundary marker. This land wasn't just farmed, it was earned. And no one, not the state, not the governor's cronies, has the right to erase that. Outside, protesters gathered with signs. Some carried photos of their own family farms. Some wore military caps. A few had their kids on their shoulders. And in the middle of it, Abel stood quietly, not shouting, not waving, just standing, as if his roots ran deeper than anyone could imagine. That night, a drone caught a live stream of the farm, lit only by lanterns and fire pits, filled with people refusing to leave. The caption read, "They drew a line in the dirt, and the people came to stand on it." The courtroom was packed. Press, protesters, farmers in overalls, law students, a few quiet men in expensive suits, and at the center, Abel Montgomery, sitting upright in his brown corduroy blazer, the old map rolled neatly on his lap like a musket from a forgotten war. Judge Helena Price, a woman of sharp eyes and sharper silence, tapped her gavel once. "This is the matter of Montgomery v. State of Alabama," she said. "The court will hear opening arguments." The state attorney, Davis Harlan, a man whose ancestors once sold land from under freedmen's feet, stood first. "Your Honor, the law is clear," he began. "Eminent domain allows for the acquisition of land when it serves a public interest. Our plans include solar infrastructure, housing, and improved water access for surrounding counties." He paced. "Mr. Montgomery, while honorable in legacy, resides on land that has outlived its current value to the state." There was a silence, not from agreement, but disbelief. Sandra rose next, her frame small but voice powerful. "Your Honor, let's be clear. This case is not about environmental justice or public good. It's about erasure of history, of legacy, of black land ownership." She walked over to the evidence table and held up the hand-drawn military deed. This document was signed in 1867 by a Reconstruction officer empowered by Congress to redistribute land to freedmen. It's authenticated, certified, and legally binding. She turned to the gallery, and it is older than the very laws they're using to try and seize it. One by one, Sandra called witnesses. A historian specializing in Reconstruction land grants, a retired Army archivist who verified the signature of Major Augustus Harlan, a local farmer whose property had been quietly condemned 6 months prior. Then she called Deputy Carla Brinks. Carla stood in uniform, her badge catching the courtroom light. "I've served this county for 32 years, she said, "and I've seen things go missing. Records, land titles, even evidence, especially when it involves money." Her eyes flicked to Davis Harlan. "They don't want Mr. Montgomery's land because it's in the way. They want it because it's perfect, untouched, clean water, deep wells, and because he doesn't have the money to fight like they do. Then Sandra did something bold. She requested to enter Exhibit F, a soil sample taken from Abel's land, tested by an independent environmental lab. Contrary to the state's claim, the soil is pristine. In fact, it scored higher in sustainability than the very land the state uses for public farming. She let that sink in. They aren't protecting the environment, they're preparing to profit from it. Judge Price took it all in, silently. She dismissed the court for recess, eyes never leaving the evidence table. Outside, the crowd had doubled. Some held up signs that read, "Land has memory. Don't bulldoze Black history. Hashtag Stand with Abel." News anchors reported live. TikTok videos hit millions. Even a retired senator tweeted support. Abel watched it all, unmoving. "This ain't just about me," he said to Sandra. "It's about every man and woman whose roots got paved over while no one looked." That night, Judge Price ordered a full halt on state action until the case concluded. And inside the courthouse, under the seal of Alabama, one old man and one young lawyer were proving something powerful. That justice might be slow, but when it finally arrives, it walks in with boots dusty from the fields. The morning mist hung low over Abel's land as cameras gathered again. This time not at the courthouse, but at the well near his east field. A local environmental group had partnered with Sandra to conduct an on-site demonstration, something the judge had cautiously allowed after the soil test debacle. The air was quiet, reverent. Abel stood with a rusty pump handle in his grip. Then creak, squeak, the water rose. Clear, cold, and cleaner than most bottled brands. A child in the crowd whispered, "It looks like glass." An elder near her replied, "That's what it looked like before they dammed everything." Sandra stepped forward with a microphone. "This well predates every ordinance used against Mr. Montgomery," she said. "And this water doesn't just nourish, it remembers. Every hand that dug, every drought survived, every life built from its flow." She paused, looked directly into a drone camera broadcasting live. "And they tried to pave over that." At the courthouse, the state scrambled. Davis Harlan filed a motion for suppression of the field test video, calling it staged and emotionally manipulative. But Judge Helena Price denied it. Her written response would be quoted for weeks. "The law is not blind to history, nor is it deaf to truth simply because it is inconvenient." Then came the real crack in the dam. A whistleblower, anonymous, a former aide in the state environmental office. They delivered a manila envelope to Sandra's office with no return address. Inside, emails between state officials and Maddox Energy discussing fast-tracking land acquisition before rezoning became public. A signed memo approving condemnation before any soil or water testing had occurred. And a single post-it note with 4 words scrawled in red ink. "Clear it. Quietly. Quickly." Sandra's hands shook as she read. This wasn't just negligence, it was intentional theft. Armed with the documents, she filed a motion for fraudulent eminent domain, a move that turned the courtroom into a hornet's nest. The final hearing was packed to the rafters. This time, Abel didn't wear his old blazer. He came in his work clothes, denim, boots still dusty, sleeves rolled. He stood when asked, but never raised his voice. When the judge asked if he had a closing statement, Abel paused, then said, "I ain't a lawyer. I'm just a man who never left his land, never sold it, never signed it away. I was born from it, and one day I'll go back to it." He looked around the room, but they tried to cut me off from it, like I was never supposed to be here, like my family never mattered. He stepped back. But this water still flows, this soil still grows, and now the truth does too. That night, the news ran one headline. News article: "Water doesn't lie. Farmer exposes state land grab scheme." And across social media, 3 words trended for 72 hours straight. Hashtag the water spoke. 3 weeks passed. The courthouse steps were empty now. The reporters had gone, but the world hadn't forgotten. Judge Helena Price's verdict dropped just after sunrise. In a 47-page opinion, she wrote, "The court finds that the attempted condemnation of Mr. Montgomery's property was not only procedurally flawed, but substantively corrupt. This land was never lawfully acquired by the state, and its legacy cannot be extinguished by profit, pressure, or political interest." It was over. The injunction became permanent. The land, his land, was safe. Abel sat on the porch when Sandra arrived with the official court papers in her hand. He looked up, eyes steady but misted. "So it's real now?" "It always was," she smiled, placing the documents beside him. The next Saturday, the town held a gathering. Not a protest, not a rally, a celebration. People came with pies and guitars, lawn chairs and lanterns. A few local veterans read aloud from the original deed. Children ran through rows of corn Abel thought he'd have to tear down a month ago. And in the center of it all stood the well, roped off with bunting, with a carved sign newly mounted in the ground. Montgomery Spring, EST 1867. Let the land remember who loved it. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Veteran farmer defeats state in historic land case. Water rights, black land history, and one man who wouldn't move. Offers came in. Documentary crews, podcasts, publishers. Abel said no to most, but he said yes to a local high school history teacher who asked to bring her students by every spring. "I want them to see what standing your ground looks like," she'd said. He agreed, and I'll show them the line they tried to bury. In the fall, Sandra received a letter from the governor's office. Not an apology, but a request. Would Abel be open to consulting on future land use ethics policy? Sandra laughed and passed the letter on. He read it once, then folded it into his back pocket. "They came for the land," he said. "Now they want to learn from it." At dusk, as the fireflies began to rise from the soil, Abel walked to the edge of his property. He knelt, ran his fingers through the earth. "Still here," he whispered, "and so am I." And behind him, the house stood strong. The well bubbled steady. And the land, the same land they tried to erase, stood like memory, like legacy, like truth that refused to die.